Welcome, everybody. We are going for our next session in the Ethics in Publishing Conference. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Randy Townsend, Director, Publications Operations at the American Geophysical Union. Randy is kind of doing a triple threat here at this conference. He's speaking today, moderating tomorrow, and doing opening remarks on Friday. And Randy, congratulations for becoming our editor-in-chief of our Journal of Ethics in Publishing. I'll introduce Randy briefly, and then he will go with his presentation. So Randy Townsend, MPS, has worked for the American Geophysical Union for more than 14 years. His career focuses on the execution of the publication department's strategic goals and the performance and development of an expanding portfolio of scholarly journals, requiring oversight of peer review operations and content integrity. He has been a leader in policy implementation and manages allegations of misconduct and ethical violations. Randy served as a judge for the Excel Awards and is on the advisory board of the Association Media and Publishing. He is a member of the Council of Science Editors, the International Society of Managing and Technical Editors, ISMTE, Programming Committee, and serves as co-chair of the Society of Scholarly Publishing's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. His pronouns are he, him. And Randy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you again for speaking today.
Thank you so much, John. And before I get started, I'd like to thank my colleague at AGU, Beth Bagley. She helped me design this presentation. There is a warning up here because some of the language is a little bit inflammatory. So, you know, if harsh language upsets you, you may want to maybe mute some of this information or step away for a few minutes. I just wanted to give you that heads up. So just a quick background about AGU for those that aren't aware. The American Geophysical Union is the largest earth and space science organization in the world. Here are some of our numbers, just so you can see. We have more than 60,000 members worldwide, and we have 22 peer-reviewed journals. So there is a lot of people that are connected to our research. We have nearly 700 editors and associate editors across the world. Our social media presence is definitely growing. Nearly 16,000 plus peer reviewers. So, you know, really a lot of people that, you know, we connect to. And I'm in a very interesting role because I get to meet a lot of really interesting characters. I was at one of our annual fall meetings, and a gentleman walked up to me and he asked me if I've ever heard of climate change. And I said, sure, I've heard of climate change. And he said that he's the one that invented climate change. So just to kind of help you understand the kinds of individuals that I meet, some are really, really funny and some are really, really serious, but you meet them in different scenarios. So what I'd like to talk to you about right now is a little bit about some of the activities that circumstances surrounding one particular individual that I met. And part of my role at AGU is I manage the allegations of misconduct that come into AGU. I've done this for nearly 10 years there. And for anyone that's ever assessed these kinds of communications, usually they read like, you know, this is who I am and this is what's wrong, and I need your help to fix it. So some of the previous sessions today talked about the role of being a steward of content. And absolutely in this role, you're definitely a steward for sensitive information. You're a mediator and you're a communicator. But so one Friday evening where I was working a little bit later than I probably should have. I'm not sure, you know, how people find themselves working late on a Friday evening when, you know, pre-COVID, you can actually go home for the evening because you're in the office. But I knew I should have signed off, and it was late. but I decided to check one final email before I wrapped it up. And this was an email where I actually met Kara. So Kara, she lived in New Zealand. She was a student and as an author as well. And she told me that she had an advisor. So this is an excerpt of the email that I received from Kara of how I was introduced to Kara. Kara's advisor, or she explained to me that her advisor was trying to sabotage her career and destroy her life. He told her to kill herself and that she belonged in a crazy war. She actually has attempted suicide. The corrupt university is protecting him because he brings in grant money, and she will kill herself. So Kara's research was her life. It was, according to her, her institution's integrity was unreliable. She had no support, and she felt as though she had nowhere to turn. So whenever you have these kinds of emails, any kind of allegation, you have to try to collect information about, what's wrong with this particular individual and notify the person that there's an allegation brought to them about somebody taking their content or somebody misbehaving or having, doing something inappropriate. So I'm not sure if you've ever tried to have a phone call or a conversation with a person that's literally a jerk, then you might understand the way this conversation went when I reached out to the individual to just see, there's a claim here that you're taking somebody's content. Do you have any way, first you reach out to the institution and I was getting closed doors on me and no one wanted to talk to me. I actually reached out to the individual, contacted the person, and they also let me know that in no short order, as soon as they found out why I was calling and who I was calling about, they became very short. They were very abrupt. They no longer wanted to continue this conversation. So it became extremely frustrating because all I had now was this poor person or this individual, Kara, who's desperately reaching out for help and nowhere to turn. And just to go back a little bit for that Friday evening when I received that message from Kara, it set off all kinds of emergency bells within myself. And, I wanted to reach out to this person because they're expressing being on the edge of committing suicide. So I contacted one of the only other people that I could find in the AGU building, also foolishly working late on a Friday evening, and that's my good friend and colleague, Billy Williams, who is a leader in this particular space. And I asked him if he was, in his office, if he had a moment, and I forwarded the email to him and I went right to his office so we can figure out what we can do to help Kara. And just also for the record, Kara's not the real name of this individual. I would never do that, use the real name. So I am definitely protecting the integrity of the individual, but sharing the story. The story is very much true. So first thing that I realized is that I needed to understand country codes because this isn't a situation where I'm just dialing across country. I need to figure out how to reach this person or this area and at the very least, have a wellness check put in place. And it took some follies to try to figure out how to do it. And as the night crept on, we finally were able to do it. We reached the authorities in that general area. And we asked them to conduct a wellness check because we received a disturbing correspondence. And we had to turn it over to let things happen over the weekend, which was very, very difficult weekend. And Billy and I, we had a few conversations back and forth. because it was shocking to receive that kind of a message. So the title of this presentation is Author Harassment, but it goes a little bit more, and it could have been rephrased a little bit to say author harassment, but then what as an organization are you going to do? How are you going to deal with these kinds of scenarios? Because really, how many cadres are out there in the earth and space sciences being driven away from their passion because the established power dynamic and systemic abuse of authority and influence fails to protect them? As an organization, we began to ask ourselves some hard questions, leading us into unfamiliar and uncomfortable areas. If you've never been harassed or discriminated against, you may not understand why change is needed, let alone how change happens and who's responsible for making the change. So let's start a little bit with the why. So in 2014, Anna Simmons published this article in Nature that reported female trainees doing field work was disproportionately vulnerable to sexual harassment and sexual assault. The survey Simmons conducted included more than 600 field scientists. The majority of those reporting harassment were trainees, which the team defines as undergraduate or postgraduate students and postdoctoral researchers. 5 of them were in high school at the time of the incident. For women, the perpetrators were predominantly senior to them professionally within the research team. Men who reported abuse, meanwhile, were more often targeted by their peers than by a superior. AGU itself as an organization was never directly involved in any kinds of scandals. The fact that these incidents often go underreported was not overlooked by us as an organization, however. Dykes in a stressful relationship. That sounds so bad on every level. But this is a title from the article that was actually submitted to one of our journals. It came through and my staff flagged it to my attention. And I immediately notified the handling editor. The editor wasn't looking for anything but the scientific merit of the submission. So the way this title read completely escaped her. So I got her on the phone. In a phone call, I shared the ways in which a title like this could be viewed. Luckily, in this case, it was innocent on all levels. The authors weren't trying to get anything by, and they agreed to change the title because of how it could be perceived. I like to recognize my team because they were vigilant in paying attention. Something earlier in the previous session, Barbara Klein-Pope mentioned that she bounced ideas off of Peter and about the word dignity. I say all that to say, this is a slide that I use from time to time because Gucci, Prada, H&M, and others had products that go to market when they're that were really racially inappropriate. In publishing, think of how many layers are involved before the actual publication. Whether it's a book acquisition or a journal submission, there are staff, there are editors, there's reviewers, copy editors, proofreaders, designers, marketing. Along the journey to the retail market, there was a lack of voices that presented these kinds of fiascos from occurring. In this one presentation, I had consulted with Beth Bagley, who I recognized earlier on, to help me with the design and with the tone of this presentation because it could be inflammatory, and I wanted to be respectful as I went along. So I bounced ideas off of her. When I received the email, I contacted Billy Williams, and he and I worked together to get it through. There's people that you connect with when you're trying to accomplish a common goal. And these products went all the way out. There had to be an advertising person. There had to be a designer, someone in production, manufacturing. Somebody had an opportunity to say, you know what? these things may not be appropriate at this time. Going back to the why, at AGU, we began taking a hard look at ourselves and our activities. These numbers reflect attendees at our annual fall meeting. The meeting usually attracts upwards of 26,000 attendees. From 2014 to 2018, if you can see, there's little movement in gender diversity, and racial diversity, there's barely, hasn't moved at all. In our journals, we compared gender diversity on editorial boards with our membership. So here we've made some progress, but we still have a ways to go. If you can see this red line that goes across, that's the female members of AGU. The blue line represents the editors, and you can see from 2012 that it has increased. That's probably the most promising number of increase. But in terms of our EICs, which is the yellow line, our editors-in-chiefs, we have a ways to go. In our associate editors, we're close, but we can still hit the mark a little bit. So this moves us to the how. How do we change? My good friend Jory and Brooks Hansen, they explored unconscious bias in peer review. This article was published in Nature back in 2017. Once again, when you start looking at yourself, it may not always be the story that you want it to be, but it can be the beginning of a journey that provides that baseline. So AGU led a closed-door session about sexual harassment in the sciences. Our researchers are more than just AGU members, so a narrow focus would produce inadequate results. Session 4 was especially critical. It's the role of scientific societies in establishing the desired climate and culture in science. We wanted to really understand what the expectation was for us as an organization from our members, and what we could and couldn't do. We can't save the world, but we can protect our corner of it and support others that are protecting their corners. In 2016, we had 8 sessions at our annual meeting that were related to what we call now DE&I. I've heard other terms as well. I actually like to incorporate justice into it, which was mentioned also in our earlier session. But 8 sessions in 2016. And in 2018, that number had grown to 28 sessions. And by 2019, we had to produce a field guide to navigate through all the programming. So, you know, it's really incredible of how much this discussion has evolved and has guided our activities. So once again, this slide here is just a reiteration of the previous slide where I showed this data, because this was our baseline. We had to actively work to get better. So AGU convened a task force to review our activities and help us explore opportunities to make sustainable improvements. The task force recommendations were to expand the definition of scientific misconduct to include harassment, bullying, and discrimination. It includes a code of conduct implications for honors and recognition and AGU governance participants. Among other things, a policy to cover member misconduct that harms another AGU member and may bring harm to AGU's mission or reputation, and the use of sanctions self-disclosure, similar to a conflict of interest self-disclosure to help in honors and awards implementation. One of the challenges we discovered is that people apply these terms in different ways. So we want to be clear about how we were applying the definitions of diversity and inclusion and equity. So these are definitely stated in our ethics policy. And following the recommendations of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, we officially updated our definition of scientific misconduct to include harassment in all forms, discrimination and bullying. Something that can hopefully help the players operating in our space. And finally, we get to the who. pretty much we all have to change in order to make it really work. So, we update our ethics policy. We have the nomination disclosure. State AGU is one of our, what I consider one of our most popular, more powerful initiatives that we launched, because at our meeting where we have 26,000 people or so, it's really important that we have people trained that can help should something happen. Things are bound to happen when you have a large number of people. So how do you report it? How do you know how to keep people safe? If you were harassed by an individual of authority and power, and you want to attend a session this person's convening, how you feel comfortable coming to our conference at all. So, Stealth AGU really helps with a reporting mechanism and helps us understand how we can provide support to our members. So really what the ethics policy update means is conduct towards others. And I mentioned discrimination, harassment, and bullying. It definitely governs our AGU volunteer leader conduct. So we're looking at on all levels of how people engage with our activities and interact with our researchers. So out of the task force recommendations was this resource that's freely available called the Ethics and Equity Center. And it is really, really packed with, there's statements, there's trainings, there's links to trainings, links to articles, anything you could think of is really a part of the Ethics and Equity Center. And I really encourage you to take a look at it. Three things that it has here. Well, it provides resources to anybody that wants to access them. Free access to legal consultation, which we thought was really, really huge. People come to us and they don't really know how to move or how to protect themselves or who to talk to. And we're not necessarily qualified to answer all the questions, but you can request free access to legal consultation. And it's in partnership. Once again, AG members aren't just AG members, they're members of other professional societies. And so really, this is a collective initiative right here. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, and I'll turn it over to John to see if there are any out there for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Randy. Thank you very much. So for the attendees, we do have a few minutes for questions. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A. And we do already have one from our good friend, Jasmine Wallace. I think this is referring to the first case you mentioned of Kara, Randy. She says, this is a great case. These were similar experiences shared by the founders of Seismic. So glad you're sharing this story. These types of questions make me want to ask who is most responsible for this type of issue?
That's a great question, because with this particular scenario, you had a power dynamic. You had a person, a prominent individual who clearly was being protected because of the value that the institution saw in them. And that made them undervalue the institution, undervalue the voice that Kara had. So I think the question really is, or should be focused on that power dynamic. How can we demonstrate, or how can the university demonstrate the value of each individual to say that no one person is more valuable than the other? It should be equitably looked at, and really just think, this particular person didn't have a plan B. In their mind, this was what they were going to do. From a childhood, this was their life. So to no longer be able to do that, and even go to another institution because of that particular person's influence, it was really it was really disheartening. So, I think it starts with the institution, but when we hear it, we want to put the legal, the Ethics and Equity Center has that legal component because it can help them navigate, provide guidance that, we're not necessarily trained to provide.
Thank you. I think the case of Kara really resonated with our audience because we have a couple other questions. One, please tell us what happened to Kara, and also were you and Billy Williams able to get a resolution for Kara?
So, that's a great question. And I would go back and, we had a couple of engagements, email exchanges. So nothing happened. She didn't commit suicide that weekend or in the months or even years that followed, to my knowledge. We had a few other conversations on different things. The conversation kind of dried up after a while, but I would do little Google searches just to see if there was any news. So whether or not she's still continuing her research, I honestly don't know. I haven't seen anything published or submitted from her. So, to an extent, it's disheartening. But I haven't seen notification that the worst has happened.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question. Have you found that the changes to your ethics policy have resulted in decreases in undesirable behavior? Can the Ethics and Equality Center help in this regard, at least with reporting? So
it revealed more, an increase in reporting, which was actually important, at least to me, because these incidents usually go underreported. People don't feel comfortable saying this happened, and the victim is often persecuted in so many cases, and the offender is empowered because there's no consequence. So we've seen people feel more comfortable sharing their stories, and it's hard to read some of these stories. And Billy and I, we have this running conversation where you just can't make this stuff up. We've seen some really, really horrible scenarios come across, but it's better that these things are shared so that the proper process can occur than people have to live with them or feel as though they're not accepted in what they feel is their life's calling.
So I'm sorry that we're sort of running out of time here. We have a couple other questions. I apologize that we won't be able to get to them. We have another session starting in a couple more minutes. But I do want to thank you, Randy, for presenting, and you'll get a chance to see Randy again tomorrow in the panel on Anti-Racism Toolkit for Allies. So thank you very much, Randy.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.